Welcome to What's the Story Dublin, the official Dublin City Council podcast with me, your host, Deirdre Molumby. This podcast deep dives into the work of all the moving parts that make up Dublin City Council. It also shares news of the Council's latest initiatives and exciting events. In today's episode, we're looking at the Dublin Festival of History. I am joined today by Deputy City Librarian Brendan Teeling. Brendan, you are very welcome to the What's the Story Dublin podcast.
Delighted to be here, Deirdre, and thanks for asking me.
Brendan, you're with us today to talk about the much anticipated Dublin Festival of History. Can you start by telling us, when did the festival start and who founded it?
Yeah, well, it started in 2013, and one of those sort of serendipitous things, the then City Librarian was going out to a meeting up in civic offices. We're down in Pearse Street. She said, "Any ideas if we have any extra money?" And I said, "I'd love to do a festival of history." And she came back a couple of hours later and she said, "You have your festival of history."
Wow.
So I then had to get it organised. But myself and a colleague, Tara Doyle, and a chap called Bert Wright, a programme, we put the first festival together, and that was back in 2013. And we've grown since then, obviously. But we've been able to do it annually since then. It's a free festival. And run and funded by Dublin City Council. So we're delighted to have been able to continue it on. But there have been moments when I say, why did I bring this on myself? But no, look, it's been a great success.
Yeah. And everyone loves a freebie. You know?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
What were kind of your reasons for starting the festival? Was it just, being a big history enthusiast, or were there other kind of motivations there?
Yeah, I suppose, I am an enthusiast for history, so it's something I was interested in. But I actually saw that there were a few festivals in the UK, and for a short while, for a decade, I was in exile in another organisation. So I had the idea when I was there, and I thought, well, I'm not going to give it to this organisation, And when I was welcomed back into the fold of Dublin City Council, I said, yeah, this would be great to do, because in the library and archive, as part of our work, we look after the historical records of the city. So we have records going back to 1172, the first city charter, all the way up to present day. So if you like, the history of the city is written in our records that we hold, and we're very proud to be the custodians of them. So allied with the decade of centenaries, which was a big, obviously, promotional for history in general, that all came together and said, yeah, this is something we could do because it fits with the council's aims, and it'll be a great way to get people engaged with the history of the city, and importantly, with the suburbs. Because obviously when we talk about Dublin City history, we tend to talk about things like 1916 and O'Connell Street, the GPO, or even if we go back to medieval times, it's the Viking settlement up around Christchurch, or, civic offices and that. But of course, so many people live in communities outside of the city centre. Some of those are very old communities, and some of them are actually relatively new, in historical terms. And I think it's important that we give people in those communities an opportunity to get a sense of where they live and where they come from. So it's a sort of multifaceted thing, I suppose, if you like. But that's the great thing about history. There's so much in it. Yeah,
absolutely. And for all listeners out there, this year's Dublin Festival of History takes place from the 26th of September to the 12th of October. So everyone put that in your diaries. And it all kicks off with the big weekend. What does that consist of? Yeah,
so traditionally we've had what we call the big weekend, which is where we put the focus on Irish historians, Dublin historians, but also on international historians. And they're people who we bring over, typically from the UK, but sometimes further afield. And we usually had it in print works in Dublin Castle. So an important message for our regular visitors: we're not in Dublin Castle this year. The venue is not available. So we are in the Round Room in the Mansion House on Dawson Street, itself a very historic location, I have to say. So for that weekend, we have a kick-off on the Friday evening in St. Anne's Church on Dawson Street. And then on Saturday and Sunday, we have a full day of talks and events in the Round Room in the Mansion House, and also in the Oak Room, which is part of the Mansion House as well. And that gives us an opportunity to look at, for example, how would I put this? A Dublin-centric event in the Oak Room is about Herbert Simms, the great architect of the city's public housing. But also then we have a discussion on the Irish Boundary Commission, the root of all evil, for example, and that's in the Round Room. We have a session on avant-gardists in the Russian Empire and the Russian Revolution. and we have a talk on the Hiroshima Men, which tells the story of how the atomic bomb came to be dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So there's all sorts there, and the great thing about the Round Room, it's a very big venue. So I don't think we'll sell out. So anyone who is interested, I think there'll be plenty of chances to get tickets. Unfortunately, some of the other smaller venues probably are booked out, but I wouldn't put people off, because we have waiting lists, and maybe we can talk about that when we're talking about how people can get tickets. Sorry, I ramble.
No, that's brilliant. You kind of touched there on the kinds of events that people can expect as part of the Dublin Festival of History. But yeah, can you tell us more about that range? I know that there are a bunch of walks that are organised as part of it, talks, but just such a wide range.
Yeah, I think that comes from the fact that what we want to do is make the festivals as accessible as possible.
Of course.
To be open to as many types of people as possible. And so, as I say, I mentioned the fact that we have a lot of talks out in the suburbs in our libraries. And part of that programme is done by our historians in residence. So the council has 5 historians in residence, plus a historian for children. And they play a big part in the festival, putting on events in all our libraries. So I suppose the way we see it is there are 3 types of events. We have the Round Room events, the big weekend, where the focus is really on the international and maybe the national story. We have the events in libraries, which could be anything at all, but could be very local, could be something, Dublin-wide or national. And then we have events put on by our partners. So this year we have over 90 partner organisations, and they stretch from St. Patrick's Cathedral to the Central Bank to National Museum, Henrietta Street, all sorts of organisations. And they put on their own events.
Yeah.
So we have over 300 events this year.
Wow.
And that's the biggest yet. Last year I thought, actually, you know what, it's 380 when I look at my notes.
Nearly 400.
Nearly 400.
Oh my God.
We're probably reached the peak. But look, as I say, the aim is to have a wide variety. So there's bound to be something. For people who aren't interested like I am, I'm interested in Second World War. If you're not interested in that, you don't have to worry about it, because you might be interested in ancient Rome and the woman who broke all the rules in ancient Rome, Fulvia, or you may be interested in Con Houlihan, who was you're much too young for both of you. Remember Con Houlihan, who was a well-known Irish journalist, wrote for the Irish Press, and his anniversary is coming up, and there's a talk on him. So all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
And which events, Brendan, would usually kind of attract the most people, or is it just that big wide range? Like you said, it all depends on kind of personal interests and stuff.
Yeah, I think it does depend. For the Round Room in the Mansion House, or previously the Printworks for the big weekend, we do find the international historians can attract a crowd, because it's the opportunity for people to hear them and see them when they wouldn't normally have that. But also people like Dermot Ferreter. Dermot Ferreter is giving this year's Sir John T. Gilbert commemorative lecture. This is the first time we've done this annual lecture as part of the festival, and we're delighted with the response. It's fantastic. But Dermot Ferreter, one of Ireland's most prominent historians, always attracts a big crowd. But also we have Roger Moorhouse, who's an historian of the Second World War, who's returning to us, I think, for the 4th time, and he always packs them out. We had Mary Beard just online in the Printworks couple last year, and she packed the place out. So, it's the big weekend attracts those big crowds. But then, as I say, you could have something in a local library, one of our smaller libraries. You're going to get 20, 30 people. That's all. That's all we have capacity-wise, and that would fill out. So that would be filled. So it's there's so much variety that, and sometimes it's hard for us to predict what's going to be popular. And maybe something turns out to be more popular than we expected, which is great. That was a great surprise.
And like you were saying earlier, it's important to never be put off by an event that says sold out or whatever. Always just get in touch, and there's waiting lists and other options. Yeah.
So, for example, the big weekend, we're doing that. I should talk about our partner organisation, which is Dublin City Council Culture Company, who we work with to run the festival. And so the ticketing for the big weekend is through TicketSolve. And there is a waiting list system there. So if people go on and they find that the event is booked out, just add your name to the waiting list, because this is a free festival, and that's one of its really strong selling points, is that it's free. But with free events comes the fact that people book tickets and then they don't turn up. So it's always, I would say to people, particularly if you're not making a big journey or, it's not hard for you to do, take a chance because, you never know, we might actually have a seat, we'll always try. We're public libraries. We try to let people in.
Brilliant. What makes the Dublin Festival of History unique compared to other kind of similar festivals?
I suppose the thing that makes it unique, and this is something that's remarked upon, particularly by people we bring from overseas, is that this is a festival funded by the local authority, and it's free, and people are astounded at that. And how can you do that? And we can do it because senior management in the council and also the elected members in the council have just been really, really supportive of it. And I think that's unique about it, that it's a free festival, that it's funded by a local authority, in this case, Dublin City Council. And also I think because over the years, it has allowed us build up, if you like, a community of people who are interested in it. And, the fact that so many events book out so quickly is testament to that. The people who are waiting every year for this. And when I go to events, go to the big weekend, I meet people who've been at every single festival, And it's, I think that they value it. So the people value it. And it's not, we like to think, it's a festival for everybody. You don't have to be, I don't know what the word, don't be disparaging, but it doesn't cost any money, and you don't have to be a particular type of person or from a particular background. All you have to do is have some interest in some sort of history, and you can be part of the festival.
Right, brilliant. I was wondering as well, you kind of touched on it there earlier, Brendan, the fact that you kind of try to incorporate local history, which I think is really admirable because there is such a rich history to the different parts of Dublin City. But the festival does attract these really impressive international historians. Can you tell me a bit about kind of that balance between the national and global history that's represented at the festival? Do you try to do something like kind of 50-50, or does it just kind of work out that you're trying to take every angle possible, I suppose?
I suppose what we try to do is, as I say, the international speakers generally tends to be at the big weekend because obviously you're bringing somebody over, you want it to be a big audience for them,
Yeah.
But at the big weekend, we do try then to have a balance. So this year, for example, we have a talk by William Dalrymple on the partitions in Asia, for example, the partition of India, Pakistan, etc. Shattered lands, that's called. That's in the big weekend. But we also have a panel discussion on Daniel O'Connell, and they're Irish historians. So we do try to balance the big weekend. For the other events around, they do tend to be local historians or local people. And the odd time we might have a standalone event. If somebody can only come on a particular weekend, we might put a standalone event in. So it's just really about, we try to get a sense of what would people be interested in. And we usually get it right, Yeah. Not just me, I have a team.
Have there been some events in the past or guest speakers that you were particularly excited about? Like, I know I have my favourites. Like a few years ago, the author of Wild Swans was over. That's one of my favourite books of all time. So it was so exciting seeing her. But would there be some kind of, secret favourites in there?
Well, I mean, look, Young Chang was fantastic to get her. In fact, we had her twice at the festival. That was fantastic. For myself, I suppose, when we started off, we had a hit list, myself and my colleague Tara, and we had a hit list of people. Mary Beard would have been one of those, for example. So it was great to get her, even though it was online. And for me, Simon Sharma, who lots of people will know from his television programs, but also his book, Citizens on the French Revolution, I was delighted to get him. And he sold out, literally. We had 600 people in printers for him. Yeah, Simon Sharma. We had Michael Palin, from Monty Python and other things, obviously. It was great to get him. That was really enjoyable. But I suppose historians-wise, there's people like Robert Service, who wrote biographies of Lenin and Stalin. I was really delighted to get him. Ian Kershaw, who wrote the fabulous biography of Hitler. I'm painting a very dark picture of my interests here now, Stalin, and Lenin and Hitler. But also we've had Tom Holland. Many people will know the podcast The Rest is History, Tom Holland and Dominic Sambrook. And we've had Tom over a couple of times, and he's great company, but he's a great speaker. So, yeah, I mean, there have been several that there's a few now, I won't name them, that I still have on my list, and we'll keep after them, you know.
Keep teasing us, exactly. And what kind of events or guests can we expect this year? I know of the 380 events, how do you even begin? But just give us a tease, I suppose.
I suppose, for example, one of the ones we have, I think I mentioned it earlier, which I think is really interesting in the big weekend, is The Secret History of the Women of the Special Operations Executive. Now, it sounds like a bit of a dry title, but it is about women who, during the Second World War, were dropped into behind enemy lines in Europe. And, you know, they were real-life spies, you know. And I really look forward to that. I think that's going to be really, really interesting. And then we also have Eagle Days, which is a young historian from England who looks at the history of the RAF and in particular the Battle of Britain. It's called Eagle Days. And again, I say I'm looking forward to that. And look, Daniel O'Connell is a very interesting character. Obviously a foundation, you know, a leading statesman in terms of the history of the city and the country at large. And I think that will be interesting because O'Connell, like most figures in history, does not have a simple legacy. You know, it's complicated, and he was in many ways a complicated person. And possibly the views he had some of them would not be the views that we would hold now. So I think that will be an interesting conversation here, all about Daniel O'Connell. Yeah,
absolutely. And I've just booked my tickets to the Phantom of the Opera screening, which I'm very much looking forward to, in St. Patrick's Cathedral. And there are family events. There's just such a huge range. So I really do emphasise to listeners to visit Dublin Festival of History.ie to check all of those out. Very last question for you, Brendan, because we're just running out of time here. But what do you hope for audiences or attendees to get out of this year's Dublin Festival of History?
Well, I suppose I like to think that people, in a sort of an instrumentalist way, if you like, as an official of the council, you'd like people to feel that the council is giving them something, you know, something enjoyable. You know, a lot of people's interactions with the council, as you'll know, Deirdre, are to do with, how to put this, things that they have to have interactions with the council with. And sometimes they're not happy things, you know. This is a happy thing. So I think if people appreciate the fact that Dublin City Council is committed to providing these sorts of services to the community, I think that'd be really great. I'd be delighted with that. But then also, people come up to me at the festival all the time and they say just how much they've enjoyed it. And, you know, in libraries, we're very used to giving books to people. And sometimes, you know, well, so what? We lend out thousands and thousands of books every week. But for many people, getting the book they want is a big thing. That's a big thing for them that week. Their reading is really important to them. So we have that sense in libraries that these small interactions are important in people's lives. And that's, I suppose, without being too highfalutin about it, that's also what I'd like to see people get from the festival. That's just something that's nice in their lives. You know, maybe makes the day go a little bit better. You know,
I love that. That's brilliant. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, Brendan, about the festival. I know your role with Dublin City Libraries actually covers so much, so I'm sure we'll have you on again at another point. But for now, thank you so much for joining us on What's the Story Dublin.
Could I add just something more, Deirdre, if you don't mind? Yeah. So we do have this printed programme. It's available for free in any local library. But just to emphasise, there are things that came in after the programme went to print. So I just encourage people to visit the website. You mentioned it earlier, Dublin Festival of History.ie, because that's where all the up-to-date information is. And for those who maybe find the internet a bit challenging, whatever, just pop into your local Dublin City Library and the staff there will be only too happy to help you find the events that you're interested in. So.
That's perfect. Thank you, Brendan. And thank you, Dublin City Libraries, for organising this amazing event. We're so looking forward to it this year.
And just to acknowledge the role of our colleagues in the Dublin City Council Culture Club as well. So.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deirdre.
And thanks again to today's guest, Brendan Teeling. I'd also like to extend my thanks to our audio engineer and editor, Robert Fay. This podcast was produced by myself, Deirdre Molumby, and Michael Ryan, and recorded in the Central Library Studio. Be sure to spread the word if you're enjoying What's the Story Dublin, and to like and subscribe for future episodes. Slán go fóill.